Hello, I'm Harley Schlanger. Welcome to our weekly dialogue with Helga Zepp-LaRouche, the founder and chairwoman of the Schiller Institute. It's August 11th, 2022. It's been several weeks since we had our last dialogue, and there's an enormous array of events that are occurring, but I think we'll start with a really important question, which is how is it that governments in the Western world are pursuing policies that are so opposite to what the people of their countries need and want? Helga, I know you have some thoughts on that. Why don't we start with that?
Yeah, I think that will not remain for long because, the policies which are being pushed by the transatlantic establishment are absolutely detriment to the livelihood and very existential interest of their citizens. And you can take it from the policy towards Russia, towards China, the economic policy, the energy policy. So I think, this will explode fairly soon. And that's actually what several people are expecting, that this will be a very hot fall. And it is very important that, a broad deliberation occurs among the citizens of what they want their future to be. And that means we cannot accept a limitation to free speech. We cannot accept, a gag order that, you have to have the official narrative or else you're being, ostracized in one way or another, because that is what is happening right now. And a lot of people experience and feel it that way. I talked yesterday with an old acquaintance from Austria, and he said that the Austrian population, 80% are absolutely against the sanctions against Russia. They have a history of Austria being a neutral country, and they fared well for many decades with that status. And it is increasingly perceived by the population that the government is acting on somebody's completely different orders or somebody else's orders, and are not the representative of the population. And that obviously puts a big question mark on, is this really a democracy when the governments are not doing what the voters uh, want them to do? So, well, we can discuss many aspects of it, but I think what is happening right now in Europe, under pressure mainly from the United States and Great Britain, but also NATO, uh, is it's economic suicide. I mean, if you look at the situation, we already have an explosion of energy prices, food prices. For the developing countries, this means mass famine. Figure of 1.7 billion people whose life is threatened has been named by UN officials. Now, the sanctions are hurting primarily, sure, they hurt Russia to a certain extent, but they're hurting Germany much, much, much more. I mean, the German dependency on Russian gas, which, meant that Germany fared very well and had a lot of economic benefits for decades. Now that that is being cut off because of the policies of NATO, it is hurting the German industry. I mean, there are many, many firms which are in danger of going bankrupt in the next weeks and months. And, now on top of the anti Russia campaign, almost like a command coming from, I don't know, somewhere, city of London or Wall Street, uh, is to, quote, decrease the dependency on China. Now, this was the title story in Spiegel magazine. Then the Economic Institute from Munich, the IFO Institute, has now a big new paper, a new study, where they basically say that the lesson has to be learned, dependency from Russia. Now the dependency from China has to be decreased. Now, if you look at the economic entanglement between Europe and China and Germany and China in particular, the auto sector, the machine tool, the chemical industry, on the other side, the dependency on batteries in many areas. If you now do what these people are proposing to replace the largest trade partner, China, with a diversion into so-called like-minded countries, partnerships of free trade, like-minded countries. I mean, this is economically completely ridiculous. It's suicide, because what you are left with, if you replace Russia with some East European countries, just look at the figures, the number of people these countries have as compared to Russia, the wealth of raw materials Russia has as compared to a country like Poland or Czechoslovakia or whatever. It does not work. But even more important, if you now try to, cut the relationship with China, decouple completely, because this is what's behind that, well, then you are left with what? You are left with the United States, which cannot replace China, Great Britain, which is going into the worst economic collapse. This is openly discussed in the UK. And, a couple of meager countries like Japan, Australia, and that's about it. And then on the other side, because of this anti-Russia, anti-China policy, there is a whole new development occurring, a new world economic order reviving the spirit of the non-aligned movement is emerging around China and the Belt and Road Initiative. China, which is now ever stronger allied with Russia, but more than 130 countries are allied with Russia and China. That's the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the BRICS countries, that is Brazil, Russia, India, South Africa, China. Then you have other organizations like the OIC, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, the Eurasian Economic Union, and most organizations of the so-called Global South are going in the direction of reviving the spirit of Bandung, reviving the non-aligned spirit, because they do not want to be pulled into a geopolitical confrontation between the United States on the one side and Russia and China on the other side. This is why they refused to join the sanctions against Russia. And this is why they now are again talking about the 5 principles of peaceful coexistence of the Bandung spirit, which is exactly the same thing like the UN Charter, by the way. So these countries are now moving very quickly to de-dollarize. They are making more and more trade in rubles, rupee, renminbi, and other local currencies. They are building a new currency system, and they are focusing on investment in real development. So if the West is determined to decouple from that only growing dynamic in the world, they're shooting themselves in the foot. They're completely committing economic harakiri. And, I think the population will not go along with it. And I think these establishments better rethink what their attitude is on all of this, because what they are proposing is simply not workable. It's blinded by geopolitical, prejudices, by Cold War mindset, by zero-sum game, as compared to this other group of people who want to have a win-win cooperation, and they really want to have development and address the real problems. So I think the elites, or what, I don't know if you can call them elites, the establishments of Europe and the United States and Great Britain, they're really off the wrong track. And, I think I can only say, the Schiller Institute is proposing solutions. We have shown the way for, now 51 years since my late husband recognized that the decision by Nixon to revamp the Bretton Woods system in the direction of a total monetarist policy would lead to exactly the kind of collapse what we are seeing right now in the world. we have been working on proposals, and now we are proposing, to have a new Bretton Woods system, a new credit system, to have a new global security and development architecture, which takes into account the interest of every single country on the planet. And that is what needs to be put on the agenda. Let me just say one thing, right now, what we have seen in the last period was an unbelievable arrogance on the side of the Western governments, where they basically say, we control the narrative. Anybody who has a different opinion will be suppressed, in one way or another. Now, that is not democracy, and that has nothing to do with the so-called values of the West. I can only say that since the works of Nicolaus of Cruz, who worked in the 15th century on groundbreaking conceptual questions concerning the sovereignty of the nation state, he, in his famous work Concordancia Catholica, developed for the first time the principle that government is only legitimate with the consensus of the governed. That's the difference between an oligarchy and a legitimate government. And that is the question which will play out in the next period. And I can only invite you, our viewers, to think about this and work with us to correct things before it is too late.
Now, Helga, let me just take the remaining time we have to throw out a couple of aspects of the situation which you just elaborated, give you a chance to make these points even more forcefully. We had the Pelosi trip to Taiwan, which on the one hand is a deliberate provocation. It's combined with media attempts to make China the enemy image. What's your assessment? There's some who are saying that this means the United States is being pulled into a conflict with China. Where do you think this is headed?
Well, I think Wang Yi, the Chinese foreign minister, commented on Pelosi's trip that, it was a pretext to move more military hardware permanently into the Pacific. And there is an article in Foreign Affairs which says the United States has to prepare for the coming war with China. Unfortunately, that is really the direction in which things are going. I think what the PLA did in response, first of all, just to restate it, all the people who are talking about the rules-based order, there is a UN resolution which basically says the one China policy is what is accepted by the UN Security Council. And, this is official policy. Therefore, when Pelosi goes to Taiwan to support the forces who want to have independence, this is a violation. I made in one article, I wrote the example. This is like as if Prime Minister Mishustin from Russia would go to Saxony and tell the government in Dresden that they should declare independence from the Berlin federal government. That would be regarded so nicely either. But, people think they can do whatever they want with impunity, what they never would like to be done to themselves. I think the net result of it is that, the resolution of China to stick to their policy of peaceful reunification with Taiwan is all the more confirmed. But, Pelosi probably has sped up the process of unification one way or another, because China will absolutely never allow independence of Taiwan, which they regard rightfully as belonging to China since ancient times. And just the fact that the Japanese occupied Taiwan for a little period doesn't change that one iota. So I think, this Pelosi trip was, an ego trip for her, but it had tremendous strategic damage. And, it is unfortunate that very stupid people in Europe are taking that as a pretext to say, now we have to also declare independence from China, which is leading to the result I just mentioned.
And you mentioned stupidity in Europe. Going back to your opening statement about the energy crisis, we're now getting warnings coming from think tanks in the United Kingdom that people are going to suffer from what they call fuel poverty. in this coming winter. What can you tell us about that?
Well, there is actually now a big freak out in the UK. Former Prime Minister Gordon Brown just said that, with the expected energy price increase, between a third and half of the population will face energy poverty in the coming year. That, he says that what will happen to the pensioners and the children reminds him of the worst fables from Charles Dickens, portraying the poverty in England at the time. And I think that that is just completely unnecessary, because, all you had to do is go back to diplomacy. You could reopen Nord Stream 2, which is ready to go. You could basically get Nord Stream 1 function again, and you could, basically cooperate to solve this problem, rather than going into a winter of complete discontent and a dark age. I mean, what we are looking at is really the literal dark age, because, if the lights go out in the winter and people are freezing, and what you have to add to that is that the food prices will escalate. There is right now a revolt among the farmers in Holland, in Germany. You will see more farmers taking the streets when the harvest is over. That's the only reason why you don't see them so much right now. But also in the United States, in India, and so forth. And the reason why these farmers have become so radical in a certain sense is because they realize that the present policies want to prevent them from producing food, at a time when you have a world famine. And that they are realizing that the present policies are designed to finish them, to get them out of business. And since most of these farmers are people who regard their job as a vocation, not just as a business, but they really think that it's a good thing to produce food for people to live. So it reaches a point, where some of these farmers have told us that with the present policies, in a few months, there will be a lack of food for animals, for people. So the policies need to be changed dramatically.
Now, Helga, I think it's worth mentioning at this point. You brought up this question at the beginning, that the way to address this discrepancy between what people want and need and what governments are doing is to have open discussion and dialogue. And yet, there's been an operation launched in Ukraine to try to silence co-thinkers of the Schiller Institute, what some people are calling a hit list or a kill list. You're on it. I'm on it. Diane Sarah's on it. 30 of the 70 something people have spoken at our conferences. This is part of the attempt to control the narrative using threats. What can be done about this?
Well, I mean, this is um, an institution called Center Against Disinformation, CCD. It belongs to the Ukrainian presidency. It is in large part financed by the US Congress by a budget, which is why Scott Ritter, who is one of the people on the list, is demanding from Schumer, against whom Diane Sayre is running as an independent LaRouche candidate for Senate, that he moves to cut this off, or remedies that, because otherwise it has the stink of corruption, if you ever have have seen it. And I have, together with some other people on that list, we are demanding that the governments, like the German government, uh, Chancellor Scholz, Foreign Minister Baerbock, that these people put pressure on the Ukrainian government to completely dissociate themselves from it and denounce this. This is obviously an attempt, and what did the people who are on that list actually say? Like, take myself, I'm saying that if we continue with the present policy of confrontation with Russia and China, there is the danger of a third world war. And there are many thinking people who are saying something quite similar. And I have demanded an international security architecture to remedy that. Now, if you can't say that anymore, and if you are called a war criminal because you're saying that, I mean, this is really, demasking those who are saying that. So I'm calling on the German government that they should move to absolutely dissociate themselves and reject this, make sure this list is being eliminated. Not the people, but the list.
Well, and your statement, as well as the statement that's being signed by others on the list, are posted on the schillerinstitute.com website, and people should download them and circulate them, because this really is the question of, as Scott Ritter said, is Schumer silencing free speech? And it's clear that that's what they're doing. Now, in the same context, we saw this quite wild raid by the FBI on former President Trump's home in Mar-a-Lago, Florida. This is, again, what your husband warned about. If you don't move against the permanent bureaucracy at the Justice Department, then you will have lawlessness. What can you say about this?
Well, obviously, I condemn this, but I also have to say, if President Trump would have exonerated my husband when he was still president, this would not have happened to him. Because, what happened to Trump with Mar-a-Lago, where the FBI, basically did not subpoena, did not go, the orderly way to settle such a question, but raided and then took everything they could possibly take. 40 FBI agents were involved. Now, when the raid occurred on our house and office in 1986, it was 400 FBI agents and armored vehicles. And, that was what Ramsey Clark once named the largest destruction of US law in history. So I can only say, this is terrible, because this is, but the effect probably will be that the population will rally all the more around Trump. And it also shows the desperation of the permanent bureaucracy, because they realize, that they don't run things anymore, neither in the United States nor worldwide, despite all of these wild moves which we see right now of diplomats running around the world trying to tell people that they have to follow the US orders. But, I can only say, if Trump would have exonerated my husband, it would not have happened.
Now, in this context of this incredibly heated political situation, what are the plans ahead for the Schiller Institute? I know we're looking toward a very active set of events and conferences coming up in September. What should people look for?
Well, we will celebrate the 100th birthday of my late husband in September with a series of events. You should all tune in, become part of this mobilization, because, if the people of the United States in particular, but also people around the world, would have listened in time to what Lyndon LaRouche had to say, we would not be in this kind of a crisis. So we will, celebrate his life and his work with, ridings, with conferences, with rallies around the world. And you should join us, because that is the only way how we will get out of this crisis. And very upfront is we have this call for a new Bretton Woods conference and an ad hoc committee to organize for a new monetary system, new credit system, because only if you eliminate the cause for the war can you hope to maintain peace. So I can only ask you, join us, join the 100th birthday celebration of Lyndon LaRouche, and that's the best you can do for yourself and your future.
Well, Helga, it's good catching up with you after having missed the last few weeks. People should, again, go to the schillerinstitute.com website, and hopefully, all things considered, we'll be back again next week.
Till next week.